Hello, everybody. And hi, Steph. How are you? So I know that Steph is in here. And oh, Doug, how are you? So it's just like family time, Steph and Doug. Well, I hope you're having a good Memorial Day weekend. Hey, Craig, how are ya? So we got 3 people for sure in here. And oh, actually, it says that I have 6 in here, so some people don't make comments, and that's okay. But I thought it was Memorial Day weekend. I hadn't done a live for a little while, and I thought I would just talk some gardening talk. Doug says he's going to build raised beds. I love raised beds. In fact, over the last few years, Joe and I have been making more and more and more raised beds because I told him that the older I get, I think maybe at some point it's going to be hard. And well, that's funny. Nightbot is giving Steph a bad time already. He says, too easy. Stop scamming symbols. I'm not really sure what Steph would have done because I don't see any symbols. Steph, just ignore Nightbot. But I do have them there so that I can show different members if they have YouTube channels. And so that's kind of, and I tried to set Nightbot so that even if you did a lot of capitals, even if you did emojis, that he wouldn't say things. But I think Nightbot has a mind of its own. It doesn't really make any difference. But this morning, I thought it would be fun since it's Memorial Day weekend. And up north, a lot of people don't plant their gardens till Memorial Day weekend, just because we have such a bad time at frosts or even snows. Oh, and Doug says I can turn the span protection off. I should probably just do that because once in a while we do have weird people in, that are trying to be scammers, but and I knew Craig was doing, I'm going to put that up. He's doing wicking tubs so that it holds the moisture up at the cabin. And so that is exciting. Hi, Shelly. How are you? Cheyenne Life. Good morning to you. Now, she is also in Wyoming, and she also has a YouTube channel. And so she's been planting and starting plants and doing all kinds of stuff. So it's interesting because Cheyenne is south of us. So it's interesting to see how her garden goes along with what my garden's doing up north farther. And so good morning, good morning, good morning. Very exciting. So, but if you haven't checked out her channel, please go over and check out her channel. And you can see all the things she's doing, and she's cooking things and gardening things and all kinds of stuff. And she lives in one of the most amazing houses in Cheyenne. So that is cool. And Shelly says, Doug is fixing to make me some more raised beds. And as I started to say before, Joe and I have been doing raised beds over the last few years because at some point you get old. And at some point I may not want to be on my knees when I'm gardening. Hi, Todd. How are you? And actually, Joe is not here today. He just left because he is in a golf tournament today and tomorrow. And he comes home yesterday because he had golfed the other day in what they call men's night. But he won like $60 some. And I said, you better do men's night every week. Because he loves to golf and he is a good golfer. And so he's off. Pafford Homestead, how are you? How are you, Charlie and Brandy? Now, Pafford Homestead, if you don't know them, are out of Texas. And they are doing some interesting things. And they have a video, a short, I think it's over 3 million views. something like that. Correct me if it's gone over 4 million. That is amazing. And so, hello, how are you this morning? So this morning, it's gardening. In the north, people are finally getting to garden, put stuff in the garden. Because over at the community garden, probably half have things planted and half don't have things planted. But this weekend will just be craziness. And so I thought, let's talk about some of our things that we do, some of those secrets, those tips, those things that we maybe don't tell everybody on what we're doing. Oh, look at here. Her daughter is graduating from college. Very cool. Congratulations. And more people are coming in. Hi, Lynn. Tell me, I don't know how, this is the hard thing about lives. I wish you could actually talk to people like it would be with a Zoom. And maybe at some point they'll let us do stuff like that on YouTube. I just think it would be, because sometimes you're not sure. Like Charisma 139, I don't know your first name. But if we could talk back and forth instead of just typing, that would be cool. And Lynn, good morning. How are you? But I thought I would show and tell you some of my secrets. Now, one of the things I think is really important when you're gardening is always to take some time throughout the summer to work that soil around your plants. And one thing I use is I have an onion hoe, which is just like a little teeny miniature hoe, and it's about this wide, and it just really can scrape around your onions, which I use around a lot of plants. But also, some people call this a stirrup hoe because it looks like a stirrup on a saddle. It has a lot of different names. But Joe cut the handle off and made it short for me. And this is a great one to go around, especially like when I'm going around corn, pumpkins, where I want it a little bit wider than my little onion hoe or just my regular hoe. And this just slices any weeds that might be there. But the main thing about it is that it loosens up that soil. And it's really interesting that it lets the air and the water percolate down better. Oh, first name is Carrie from Indiana. Oh, that is awesome. Thank you for letting me know that, because a lot of times on YouTube or the people that are maybe they don't do videos, but they have a name, but it isn't actually their name. And so I like that. How you, Charisma, Carrie, that's very cool. Now look at this. In Cheyenne, Wyoming, it's supposed to get colder the next few days. 50s. Well, our nights have been high 30s, low 40s, which is tough when you got plants in the ground. And I find that it really kind of stunts the growth for a while. So we have to do things to protect them. So some of the things I do to protect my garden while it's cool like that, because tomatoes and peppers, they don't like cool nights. There's a lot of plants that don't like cool nights. Now cabbages and all the brassicas, they don't really care how cold it is. They'll even take a light frost. If you have them covered, they'll even take snow. But what do I do to protect? Like I use PVC pipe, big PVC pipe, and it's slid over top of my celery. I have culverts, these black culverts that are over peppers and tomatoes. I have walls of water. Now, have you guys ever tried walls of water? Do you know what those are? Walls of water are these round plastic things, and they have cells. And it's just that they molded the plastic. together. So, and then there's a cell and it's about 2 inches across, and then it's molded again. And this flexible plastic, you pour water into these cells. And so the idea is during the day when the sun's out, it warms up. It warms up the water, it warms up the soil, and then at night it protects it. And over at the community garden, I have all kinds of pumpkins, cucumbers, squashes that are in these walls of water. Now, the bad thing about a walls of water, it has a tendency, if it's windy, to want to tip over. So you have to brace them up. And so what I do is I turn a tomato cage upside down so that the part that would be in the ground is up above, and I slide that wall of water over it, fill it with the water, and then I put another cage that's upright, that's a bigger size tomato cage, and it holds it. I don't have to worry about the wind tipping it over or anything, and it really increases. So even when we've had 30 some degrees at night, I've had no effects on my pumpkins or squashes or anything. So that makes me happy. And Cheyenne Life says, I need to get an onion hoe. I'm actually going to give away an onion hoe in an upcoming video. So don't buy it quite yet because you never know. She has 250 onions, red onions and sweet onions planted. I got 4 packages and they're about 75 each. Yeah, so I have close to what you have. And then I planted some bulbs because I want to show the difference of planting the sets versus planting the live plants. And up at where we are in Wyoming, we also have Canadian thistle and bindweed. But let me tell you a trick with Canadian thistle. And bindweed is actually a biannual. So if you can keep cutting it off, instead of, we've always been told to pull the thistles and pull the bindweed. But what it does is it breaks those roots off underneath and it makes more of them. So I was talking to one of the guys from the University of Wyoming, one of the professors, and he said that they have done testing and they have found that it's better for you to take a sharp knife or scissors or something and cut it right at the base of the soil. And eventually you will get less and less and less. Because bindweed being a biannual, it eventually, if it doesn't get a flower, will die off. Thistle, when you cut it off, it has kind of a sappy part in there, and it makes it so that eventually you won't have the thistles either, because they've done some trials. And so I thought that was interesting. And Craig says, our cabin weather, because they have a cabin up in the hills, here has been rainy and cold for 10 days. Today is 55 so far and hope to work the garden today. Debbie has been busy too. Debbie is his wife, and she is a sweetheart. Charmaine, good morning. Now, Charmaine was just a winner of one of my sets of salt that I did. So that is exciting that she's here. I hope you are having a great Memorial Day weekend. Shelly is leaving. Bye, Shelly. And thanks for stopping by. Hello. The best life. Hello, how are you? So exciting. And Doug says, the boss says I have to go to work. That's Shelly that was just leaving. And they are making raised beds today. So Doug, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate it. And I know you guys are so busy. So thanks for stopping by this morning. So this morning, I wanted to talk about what we can do. Oh, let me show you this first. So Debbie's, I mentioned her house earlier, and she has this the Sturgis historic house in Cheyenne. And if you've watched any of her videos, you see parts of it amazing. I would love to have an old house like that. And let me put this one up too. See, That's amazing when you can have a house that Wikipedia says something about. So very cool. But I'd like you guys to say some of the tricks that you do. Like, I'll talk about potatoes first, because I've done some videos about potatoes that I first chit them, which means that I put them in a box or tub or whatever I have, and I'm putting them in light. I just put them on the fireplace mantle. And so they're not getting direct sunlight, but they are getting light. Hi, Anne. How are you? Let me see if I can pop that. Little Frenchie in Big Texas. And so I chit them. So what it does is it makes those eyes grow fat and short. And they'll get, they'll be kind of green, but sometimes almost greenish purple. And so when they have some really thick, short eyes that have sprouted, you don't want those long, crazy ones, because that's a lot of energy it's taken away from the tomato or the potato plant. You just want short, fat ones. Hello, Jane. Happy Farms. Good morning. What are we discussing? Taters. That's right. We are discussing taters. So first I chit them. Then with Wyoming weather, I don't plant them right out. I plant them in big pots, usually gallon-sized pots. And I put about 3 inches of soil, put them in, cover them with about 3 inches of soil. And then I just sit them in the greenhouse, because at this point, they don't need any light, so they can go under the tables in the greenhouse. And then they start to grow. And once they start growing, you have two options. You either have to plant them out right then, or you have to put more soil over top of them. So depending on the weather, I'll do one of the two things. And let me see if I can do this. Farms. And Jane, good morning. Craig says, I normally mound potatoes right away. This year I'm trenching, and then we'll mound as they grow. Now that is a lot of ways a lot of people do them. But Craig is from South Dakota, and one of the things that can happen in Wyoming and South Dakota, we can have a late hard frost, or we can have a late snowfall. And if we don't have time to cover up those potatoes, the top part will just completely die off. Even with any kind of frost, they can die off. And so that's why I like to put them in the pots. So just recently, I took all of my gallon pots, I had 30-some gallon pots of potatoes, over to the community garden, and I did a border around one of the plots of my gardens. And I dug a deep hole, put them in there, and then I mounded straw around them. And as they grow, I am going to keep adding straw up above them, because at the community garden, good soil is at a premium. So I don't want to waste any of the soil that I'm using for other plants to mound up, where if I was growing them at home, I could actually mound them up with soil. But I'm growing a lot of potatoes because I love potatoes, and I like to see how far into the winter I can get them going. So Debbie's saying, I do what works, and we always chit them. And I'm surprised that a lot of people don't chit their potatoes. They just plant them right into the ground. But I really find that you get a stronger potato and more poundage of potatoes if you chit them first. And I just think it's important. Now, if you're in the South, you can choose to pot them up before you plant them or not. But one of the things about in the South when you're doing it is that sometimes you get a really rainy spring. And if they haven't already started growing, they can actually rot in the ground. And so you just have to be careful. My Alabama Farm Life. Hello, how are you? Now, she has an amazing YouTube channel. So if you haven't checked her out, please do. And she's doing all this stuff on her own, and it's just amazing. So good morning, and I'm glad you're here. Now, do any of you have some other tricks for potatoes? Now, one of the things that I do so that, I'm mounding up either the soil or I'm using straw. Some people use hay. By the second week in July, I'll never fertilize those potatoes after that. Fertilizing, I like to use rabbit manure tea. I like to use any kind of seaweed fertilizer. If you don't have anything else, just a generic fertilizer will do, or a tomato feed will do, because a tomato feed has a really good balance of everything in there. And so actually a tomato feed is, if you can only buy one fertilizer and you can't find any kind of like seaweed or fish emulsion, go with a tomato feed, because it is really well balanced and it really helps. Greg says his major focus this year is on soil health. So important. Remember, when you're doing and you want to get good soil health, make sure that you've done soil tests. Because it's one thing for somebody to say, oh, you need this or you need that. But without a soil test, it's very hard to really tell. And so building your soil up is so important, even if you're just using compost and leaves and things like that. Castle Hives is in the house. Hello, Brian. How are you? So we're talking about potatoes right now. After the second week in July, I'm never going to fertilize, because if you do, basically you're just getting more and more growth of leaves. But if you stop fertilizing in the middle of July, you can really get more production of potatoes underground. And the other thing that I do at that point is I'm going to cut all of the leaves off. So if it's 2 feet high, I'm cutting it down to 1 foot. It still has enough leaves and enough photosynthesis to really give you some good potatoes, but you don't have to have energy go into the leaves. Do you see what I mean on that? And I only started doing that several years ago, because a gal that I met, she had done testing, and so she had these rows of potatoes, and half of them she cut, same kind of potatoes, same soil, same everything, same amount of water, same amount of fertilizer, but half of them she cut half. So if they were 2 feet tall, she cut them down to 1 foot tall. And of course, they're going to grow during the rest of this season too. But what she found was the poundage of potatoes was so much more. And I have to totally agree with her. So once I started cutting those potatoes, middle of July, the foliage, I got lots more. And, well, look here. Karen is here. Hello, Karen. How are you? Karen and I just did a collaboration in where we made 3 different types of flavored salts, and then we gave them away. It was really fun, and hers were so interesting. So I'm going to try all 3 of hers. And Happy Farms, you are an 8A. Very interesting. I go to Arizona now in the wintertime, so we're at a 10. And so it's a whole different kind of growing when you're in the south. And she would have much more moisture than I do in Arizona. And I find that very interesting. I would like to know more about your gardening. I'm going to really check your channel out. I like 511, but haven't put anything on this year, just feeding the worms. Feeding the worms is a great thing to do. Always feeding the worms. Cutting back greens on the potatoes. I know it's very interesting, and who would have thought that it would increase your poundage of potatoes? But it does a lot, because I did some testing. I did some in great big huge pots, Some I cut, some I didn't cut. Every single time, more potatoes in the ones that I cut. Debbie says she's never cut the foliage, but I only organic fertilize in the beginning of the planting. I've just found that I can fertilize all the way till about the middle of July, but then I have to stop. And then I'm cutting the foliage, and the potatoes are amazing. And Emma is here from Sunny's Place. Hello, how are you? Now, Emma is not afraid of power tools, and I like that in a woman. You go, Emma. So I hope you are having a great Memorial Day weekend. So those are just some of the tips that when it comes to potatoes. If you have tips, make sure that you're putting them in the comments. One of the other things that I really work the soil around are my onions. Now, my goal every single year is to have onions the size of softballs. Now, genetically, some onions will not get that size. Like my red onions never get that size, but they certainly get sizes of baseballs. And I really like if I can work the soil, make it so that it is really loose, fine, workable, because anything that you can do to work your soil, because a lot of times soils will want to crust, and that means it has this little thin layer and it's harder, and sometimes it cracks when it gets dry. That blocks water and air actually from getting down into the roots. So what I like to do is I have an actual onion hoe. It's out in the truck, and it looks like a little miniature hoe. And it's maybe 2 inches across, and you can just work around it. If you don't have one of those, use a stirrup hoe. Any kind of hoe that can work the way around your onions. Now, once the bulb starts to get larger, I push the soil away. I'm either using my fingers, a spoon, a trowel, and I'm just pushing away as it grows. And so anything that stops the resistance, like soil will compact around your onions and make it so it doesn't want to grow larger. So by the time it's the end of the season, there is no soil around my onions, and it's literally sitting on top of the soil. And it's just the roots that are holding it there. And you just get bigger and bigger and bigger onions. And Debbie says she pushes her soil away. I never plant them in soil. I just make an indentation and set them in there. Now, for me, with my live plants, I do plant them actually in the soil. At the community garden, it is so windy, and I want them to stand up. Let's just say congratulations to Emma. Her oldest is graduating high school tomorrow. That is so fun. And I just love it when everybody starts saying hello to everybody. Now look at this. Happy Farms is harvesting onions. We are just have them planted. I mean, I have had my plant planted for, I don't know, 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks, something like that, because they can withstand the cold. But it's interesting. She's harvesting. Mine are just growing. I like it. I do. I like it a lot. Debbie's saying, your onions will get big if your soil is fertile, fluffy. Yes, it has to be loose. It has to be workable. And they are exposed to a lot of sun, because they love sun. She's asking, what do people think about cutting the foliage on the onions? Now, I have done that on different times. Like when I'm growing onions from seed and they're inside, I do a trim. But sometimes what I have found about cutting the onion foliage, because the leaves on an onion are actually hollow. And one year when I tried to do that, because I've done it different years, we had lots and lots of rain. and it literally filled up some of those tubes. And unless you can get that water out of there, it can rot in there. So that's questionable. I think it works sometimes if the weather is okay. Other times, I think it can be a problem. It's sometimes people will just bend the leaves over. But honestly, the last few years, I haven't done anything with the leaves. I've just let them grow, use the photosynthesis to get the big onions, and I have left it. But I have tried different things because people always have ideas. And so it's interesting. Now, all vegetables, the more you work the soil, there's a few reasons to work it. First, you want it to really have the moisture go down, the air to go down. But the other thing is when you're working around your vegetables on a continuous basis, it really makes it so that you find pests, you find caterpillars, worms, aphids, anything that might be happening with your vegetable garden because you're spending more time in there. And I think that is really something to really look for. Now, the best life is planting peppers. Can peppers be transplanted deep like tomatoes? They can be planted deep like tomatoes. So if they're leggy, you want to cover them up all the way up to where those leaves start, and that will be perfectly fine. They're all in the same nightshade family, and so it will still work. Now, do they root the same way as tomatoes? Not quite, but sometimes they can send roots from that, but it's not exactly like a tomato does. But if I have leggy plants, if I even like cabbages, if they're leggy more than what I want them to be, I just plant them all the way deep until those leaves start, and you will get a stronger plant. And I have to thank Nightbot. He's showing different people. Mary's Ranch, Monty's in Motion. I saw other ones up there. Nightbot is supposed to go through all of my members that and show their links. It's just something that Nightbot is supposed to do. So if you are a member, you should see them popping through. Debbie says, just don't let the soil touch the leaves of the peppers and the tomatoes. That's true, because the moisture, and it also can make it so that if there's any disease in the soil, it can go onto the plants if it's touching those leaves. And here in Wyoming, Debbie has it in Cheyenne. I have it in Gillette. So alkaline. In fact, when we very first bought our house, first I couldn't find any worms, and I said to Joe, how can I garden with no worms? But we just started adding stuff, and the worms came. But my soil in my garden was actually 8.2 and 8.5. That is hugely high, very alkaline, makes it very hard for some plants to grow. But now it's basically neutral after 15 years of adding. And Emma says, Sandy, I love your question. I just did a video on why I planted certain things on my homestead. So make sure you check that out on Emma's channel at Sunny's Place. Awesome. And this is my question now. Why do you really garden? And people have different reasons on why they garden. This is a good pouring boiling water on weeds. I don't want. Totally will work. Just be careful that the boiling water isn't hitting any of your other plants. But boiling water. Vinegar can do that with, you just have to be careful. The thing that The honest thing of why I garden. I love the quietness. I love that there's no distractions. You can be having this crazy, crazy day, and you can go to the garden and you can work the garden, and you can, even if it's pulling weeds, and everything just disappears. That is my main reason for gardening. I always tell Joe, it's cheaper than therapy. It is just fabulous. The worms will multiply with compost and mulch. That is so true. Sorry, my phone is ringing. And we saw that completely in our yard, because literally we had to move some of the soil from by our house, because when we bought our house, we were afraid that the hillside, when it rained hard, it would go and just move right into our basement. And our house was only 2 years old at the time, and not that we didn't have any signs that it had done that. So I moved, easily, I don't know, 30, 40 wheelbarrows full of dirt. And so that it sloped away from the house, not just straight down. I never found a single worm. How is that possible? And I just couldn't believe it. Joe got home from work and it says, how can we not have worms? But they're really just deeper in the soil. If there's nothing on the top part of your soil, you just don't find them. But once you start adding the compost, once you start adding, like, we collect leaves every single fall time. And I have people that bag up all their leaves. They call me, I go and get them. And they just start working their way up higher into the soil. And then eventually they're there, because it's almost like magic. One day you're digging in your ground and all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's worms. Sometimes it's 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, depends on how bad the soil was. And it is just, it's amazing that all of a sudden there the worms are. So Debbie is saying, I'm finally seeing night crawlers and red worms here after 5 years of growing. Yeah, and see, all of a sudden there they are, because you have that richness in your soil, and the leaves and the compost and everything, because the worms have to have something to eat, and they need a lot of air. You don't want a worm to drown because the water is just sitting there. And it's just this chain reaction and all this good stuff that we just start seeing. It's just amazing. And Emma's saying that my garden is full of worms. And that's what we have now. But 15 years ago, we had nothing. It was just totally alkaline. And there were lots of places in our yard that wouldn't even grow weeds. And that is a sure sign that your soil is lacking. If it doesn't, because sometimes people go, oh, I bought a house and there's this area that there's no weeds, and so that's where I'm going to have my garden. That is probably not where you want to have your garden, because there is a reason why nothing is growing there. And it could be lack of nutrients. It could be some kind of chemical that's in that soil. And that's one of the reasons why it's a good idea to have a soil test. And I always think that you should have a soil test at least every 5 years, because you get your soil test and it tells you should add these things to your soil. So you add those things to your soil, and then you're adding compost and you're adding leaves and all the different things that you're adding. But you need to do that soil test again, because you never know. Maybe you have too much potassium now. What are you going to stop putting into your soil so you don't have too much? What if you have too much nitrogen? So it's just interesting on what you do, what you learn through your soil. Now, there's a lot of different things that you can use for protecting your garden. maybe you're protecting it from, in the springtime, from frost or snows. Maybe you're protecting it from hail. Maybe you have to protect plants from the wind, from animals. What do you do to protect? And there's different answers depending on what problems that you're having. Like in the springtime, if you're just protecting it from frost or even some snow, you can use row covers. You can cover at night, even with sheets or blankets. You can use the walls of water to protect plants. One of the interesting things I saw at the community garden this last year is the guy that has a plot on the other side of the row from me. He erected this wooden fence. I mean, it was just solid wood. You know, he just went and bought a 4x8 sheet of plywood, hooked it up. And behind that, because he has it on the north side, behind that, he planted his corn. And so I talked to him this spring about that because I thought it was interesting that he blocked the wind so completely, because he's also blocking the west sun when it sets. And so I asked him how his corn did, well, how he thought compared to when he was doing it the other way, where he just let it grow. And he said that what he found was that, because our winds can be crazy in Wyoming, he said that he found that they grew faster. They still got plenty of sun in the morning. He says it wasn't until the mid-afternoon that it went into the shade. And he said he thought his corn was sweeter, more productive. And so he's going to do it again this year because he wants to test it for a few years to see how he likes it. Because I have seen people rig up like burlap. They put posts in the ground, put burlap, and protect tomatoes or corn or whatever they're growing. But I'd never seen anybody take a sheet of plywood and just had some stakes in the ground and hooked it onto it. But he said it worked really well. Now, a sheet of plywood right now will cost you probably $60, where maybe you have just a sheet of plywood hanging around in your shed or your garage, because wood is out of control. But Charmaine, that was so sweet of you. Thanks so much for the salts. I am disabled and bought a green stock so I could grow some vegetables, some veggies. I can't get down like I used to, so the vertical has to happen for a while. That is an amazing thing to use, because planting vertically, awesome, totally awesome. When I was down in Arizona, I did some videos on those little 3-compartment things. And I actually bought extra ones that I was going to put down, or I was going to bring to Wyoming. But then when we packed everything up, there was no room for it. And so maybe I'll be able to bring them next year when we come back. But I haven't been able to find any, because I had gotten those at the dollar store. And so I want them as cheap as I bought them in Arizona, because I don't want to pay $100 for a vertical, especially when I have extra ones down in Arizona. So we'll see. But Charmaine, I totally appreciate that. It's so sweet and kind of you to do that for me. Oh, and Emma is leaving. She's going over to Mama Z's. I haven't been to Mama Z's videos for a while. I should go over there and say hello to her. But let me know if you guys have ideas that you do. Like peppers. One of the things that peppers like, which is an interesting thing, is as they grow, peppers will grow better if the leaves touch each other. They're very communal, which is interesting for a plant. But you will get more peppers, bigger plants, if the leaves touch. And so I like to plant peppers in like a circle and then one in the center. So as they grow, they touch each other. And they've done all kinds of studies with peppers. And it works with all the different kinds of peppers. It's not just like bells or jalapenos. All peppers like to touch each other. And I don't know if it's a stimulation when the leaves are touching from different plants or what, but they like it. So if you're planting peppers this weekend, plant them close enough together so that when they get even halfway mature, the leaves are starting to touch. And that doesn't work with every plant because some plants really need some airflow through them, or especially if you live in the South, it's interesting. And Karen says, my basil plant is growing huge. Do I need to trim it? Do I trim from the bottom or from the top? Well, actually, Karen, you do need to trim it. And it will not hurt it to whack the top off. In fact, it will stimulate more branches to come up, because what a basil can do sometimes is just want to grow and it just has the few leaves that are coming out. So just take it down. I don't know how tall yours is, but say it's already 6 inches tall. Cut it down 2 inches and it will stimulate all kinds of branches to come off, not just leaves, but branches. And it also stops it from wanting to flower. But if your basil or any of your herbs start to flower before you want to, just make sure you just cut down 2 inches and make sure you're cutting off all the flowers because it's early. And so you want it to have your basil or any of your herbs just really last for a really long time. And the way it lasts is the more branches it's making. And if you live someplace that it gets cold in the fall, you can always dig your herbs up and keep them in pots inside. And I can't even tell you how many times I've dug up herbs and brought them inside so that I can enjoy them all winter long. And a lot of herbs are actually perennials, but just because of our weather, we grow them as annuals. And so if you want them to last longer, say rosemary, lots of times I will just dig it up and bring it inside, or I will take cuttings off of it and bring those cuttings inside. And Karen says that hers is 8 inches tall. So you want to cut probably about 3 inches off of it, and it won't hurt it. And sometimes any kind of plant, when you cut it, it kind of goes in shock for a day or two. Other times you don't even notice it, but it will all of a sudden start branching out. Debbie says, what amazed me about something you are doing, Sandy, is planting carrots in the seed pots. How did these do? Well, actually, they're all growing, and I haven't thinned them yet. I did move them outside so that they have the cold and the hot, and I water them every day. And sometimes the days that it's been really warm, I've watered several times a day, just because they're in those styrofoam cells, and I want them to not dry out. And so I'm very excited about that. And I also got a few other ones of those styrofoam cells, and I planted my corn in there. So this coming week, I am actually going to plant the corn outside because there's a hole in the bottom. So all I have to do is push a wooden spoon up through there and the whole cell will come out and I can plant the corn. But I never like to plant my corn until after June 1st, because the soils just aren't really warm enough here in Wyoming, my part of Wyoming, to grow them. Now, on a seed packet on corn, a lot of times it will tell you that you can plant it 2 weeks before the last frost date. But here in Wyoming, in my part of Wyoming, up north, it doesn't really work. Sometimes we have really rainy Mays and the seeds can rot in the ground. But if I wait till the first week in June, I haven't ever had that problem. But this year, I have 3 different boxes, 3 different kinds of corn, 30 each. And I'm going to plant those over at the community garden. I don't know, June 2nd or 3rd, something like that. And now Debbie, she lives in Cheyenne, which is the lower part of Wyoming. And she says that her corn is about 3 inches up. So that is awesome. But sometimes, and I'm sure Debbie will agree, that we have such wet You know, it's just rain, rain, rain. It's like planting beans or peas in the ground, and sometimes they will rot right in the ground. So you just have to be careful. And sometimes it works perfect. Sometimes it doesn't work perfect. But that's just part of gardening. And oh, wrong one. Kathy says, any suggestions on picking, do you mean pickling cucumbers? Or growing and picking cucumbers. Now, a thing about cucumbers is that there's a lot of bush varieties of cucumbers, and then there's vining varieties of cucumbers. But the thing is about cucumbers, the plant itself, if it's a vining one, wants to hang. It's made to climb up something and then have the cucumbers hang. So if you have them just going on the ground, a lot of times your cucumbers will curl. And there's nothing wrong with the cucumber curling. But if you're doing like pickles or you're just slicing them, it's always nicer to have the straight pickle. So that's why I like to really let them vine. And I've tried growing different kinds of bush cucumbers. And I just find that with all the stuff that you do to make your cucumbers great, you get a lot less than when you have vining ones. So I like them to vine either up double tomato cages, where I put a tomato cage in the ground and I flip the other one upside down and hook it with zip ties. So it's really tall. It's taller than me. And they can just climb up. Sometimes I make rounded cages with fencing so that they can climb up and I can pick in the inside and the outside. Or I just do them on a fence and I let them grow. But they need you to work the soil around so that they get a lot of moisture. Some people say that the cucumber base needs to be cool and the top has to be hot. I think I don't know. I can't say that I think that's true or not true. They just need a lot of sunshine, and you have to make sure that you feed them because they want it. They're producing a lot of cucumbers, and the more cucumbers you pick, the more they will make, because all plants want to make seeds. And so you want to make sure you're feeding them, you're watering them well, and they have a lot of sunshine. Now, Debbie says that she trellises her cucumbers and melons, but never trellises a squash. Now, sometimes some squashes I have trellised before, and I've used nylons to make little hammocks for them. But the thing that she's talking about with the nutrients in the soil with the squashes, because like when I want to make big pumpkins or a lot of pumpkins, what I'll do is I'm putting a trench around there so that it'll hold a lot of water. And then as it grows, I like to bury the exposed runners, the stalk that's going along the ground, because it will root any place that it touches the ground. So if you cover that, it will root more. And it also stops if you have a problem with squash borers, because a squash borer wants to go into an exposed vine. And so if any of the exposed vines you cover with dirt, where there's not a leaf right there, that borer can't go in there. And so that just helps you. And Charmaine says, I looked for the dollar store too, but I couldn't find them. Yeah, when I was down in Arizona, I could find those 3-tiered things down there in the dollar store. But up here in Wyoming, I've looked and looked, and I looked on their website. I couldn't find it at all. Dawn here in Cyprus. Can't stay too long as I don't know what kind of fever that is. Glandular fever. but I wanted to show my support for your live chat. That is so nice of you. Thank you. And I hope you feel better, because I don't know what that is. I'm going to have to look that up. I'm writing it down. Interesting. Well, I hope you feel better, and thank you for stopping by. And the best life. Have a good day, everybody. And oh, thank you so much. It's interesting that things that work for somebody in an area may not work for somebody else. I'm always reminded, I've read the book and watched videos on Ruth Stout, and she wrote these books on her gardening, and where she doesn't ever till, she puts rotted hay down and she grows everything in that rotted hay. And then I've seen people's videos that they've tried that, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. And but that's because every situation is different. Your soils are different. They may be more acidy. They may be more alkaline. Your weather is different. You get more rain. Some places are hotter. And so just because something works in one area, like it did for Ruth Stout, doesn't mean that it will work for you. But that doesn't mean you don't try it. You know, like I tried straw bale gardening. Now, some people, it works very good. And some people, it doesn't work. But it's just like Ruth Stout stuff, that sometimes if your situation is like hers, you have the same kind of weather, you have similar soils, similar temperatures, I think it can work really, really well. But other people have taken hers and tried it in their area. But if they have way more moisture, growing those potatoes in that hay or straw can sometimes just rot. And so you just have to keep an eye on your gardening. Try those different things. Because there's lots of different things, like raised beds. Where we live, we are better off having lower raised beds than taller raised beds. Why? Because the wind in Wyoming can dry out the soil too fast. Where if you live in the east, where it's very moist and very rainy, you're better off having raised beds that are much taller, 3-foot tall raised beds, because you got the drainage. And so it's interesting on different methods. Now, Debbie's using Charles Dowling. Now, I have every single one of his books, and I love all the different ideas. Now, he's in England, and so things are different than what they are in Wyoming. But the things that I like about Charles Dowling is that he likes to grow things together. So like when you plant your beets, you're starting with 5 beet seeds in there. And a beet seed sometimes can have multiple plants that come out of one seed. And so I've done this lots of times. And so I get these beets that start to grow, and there's like 5 or 6 or 7 of them, all this big clump, and the beet leaves are coming out all over the place. And all you got to do is take it, twist that beet seed, that beet, and just pull it out. And the other ones get bigger. And so you're growing a lot more in a little space. And he does it with onions, and he does it with leeks and a lot of root vegetables that he's planting multiple. And he starts them in flats or modules first, and then he plants them out. But it's just one more thing to try. And it's really interesting what works, what doesn't work. And it all depends on your area. So I love taking these ideas from different gardeners, trying them. Sometimes they'll work in my garden, sometimes they won't work. But it really makes it interesting for what we do. So, and maybe you can take an idea and tweak it a little bit, and it works perfect for you. And Debbie's writing, too much compost can cause scabbing on potatoes or flush darkening and crisping. That is true, but also too much watering can cause that too. And can you eat potatoes that have scab on? Yes, but I would always peel them. Now, other potato diseases, you shouldn't eat your potatoes. If your potatoes get a lot of green on them, it has a chemical reaction, and that chemical that it produces is not good for you, and so you probably shouldn't eat those green potatoes. Though my dad says when he was growing up, they ate those green potatoes anyway because they lived on a farm and they ate them, and he says nothing happened to us. But there is some studies that say that the toxic levels, if you eat a lot of green potatoes, can harm you. So I just wouldn't do it. You just have to watch your potatoes and always cover them either with soil or with straw or hay or whatever you're using. Some people use leaves, anything that you have available, because all of that stuff biodegrades and enriches your soil. And this is so true. Potatoes do not like wet feet. So if you have a really heavy clay soil, be careful how you are watering. Hey, Swarmstead. Hello, how are ya? I saw some of your videos the other day. Very interesting. You guys should check him out too. Lots of things about bees, catching swarms, catching unusual swarms in all kinds of different ways. Very cool. I have to agree with you, though I read a study the other day about hugelkultur, and they were very negative about it. And I thought, why would you be negative about it? They said that it didn't really make any difference, but if things are biodegrading underground, it is going to make a difference. It's going to be good. And so I was really disappointed in the study from a college that said that hugelkultur didn't do anything. And I thought, I don't think you know what you're talking about. And I don't think you studied this long enough. So it's interesting. Steph says, your dad's comment just proves that what you don't know won't kill you. Well, I know, and I'm sure they didn't eat a lot of green potatoes. But when I was telling my dad one day a few years ago about that, and he's just looking at me, he goes, we always ate green potatoes. We didn't care. We had X amount of food that we grew, and we weren't wasting any of it. And it didn't kill them. My dad is 90 years old, and he is still gardening and doing his fruit trees and puttering around the garage. So it obviously did not hurt him. But it is a toxic, it is a chemical that's not good for you. So just be careful. I wouldn't suggest that you do it, even though my dad did. So, the hugelkultur beds suit my mountain land. And I know a lot of people that are using that method, and they really like it. And I have watched a lot of videos about that, and people are really, and like when I made my raised beds, because my raised beds are tall for Wyoming, but I thought when I get old, I want to just sit on the side. We put all kinds of branches and wood and leaves and just all kinds of stuff in there because I knew that eventually it would break down. Miss Molly Makes, hello. Now, Miss Molly, she used to be Miss Molly Cakes because she makes lots of cakes, but she does other things. And so I love that she changed her name. And you should check out her channel. It's very fun. Debbie says, my dad used to say, if it didn't kill you, it'd cure you. He said that about home distilled moonshine. Well, that's probably true. Well, everybody, It has been an hour, which you know I usually only have my lives for about a half hour because I know you guys are so busy. So I appreciate you coming by, talking about gardening, talking about hints and tricks and secrets that make our gardens great. But make sure that you, when you see different things on gardening ideas and tricks, ways to garden, hugelkultur, raised beds, growing in towers, try them. Roost out things, try them, because in your area it could be perfect. Or maybe it wasn't very successful one year. Don't give up. Try it again, because the weather can be so much different from year to year. Or maybe you can just tweak it a little bit and it can turn out to be just a phenomenal garden tool for you. So I hope you guys have a great Memorial Day weekend. I hope Joe does good in his golf tournament, and my son-in-law is coming to spend the night one night, and we are having dinner with some friends, and it should be a great weekend. So I'm off to the garden. I have weeds to pull, plants to plant, and I hope you guys have a great weekend. Thanks, everybody.